I'm back. All right, let's talk about lists and arrays in C#, and we're also going to look at using loops to access elements in both structures. All right, so I made some changes here to the program. The main method, I took all the code out and I split it into static methods. So for example, all the stuff we had before, I put in a method called Power Rangers script, and I'm just calling it here. So you can see on line 13, here's the function signature, method signature. It's doing this is a lot like creating just a function, and I'm doing this so we want to begin separating our code out into classes instead of having giant mountains of code. All right. Even though I am separating, I could put this in a class. I didn't want to for now. I just am moving it away from the main so we can turn these things on and off easily. Okay, so if I print this, if I run this, oh, I broke some stuff here. There we go. Okay. We can see I have so I have this method I threw in there, Power Ranger script, that printed out the part that you've been seeing in each example, and then I threw together some example code for how to use a list, how to use an array, and so I put those in their own functions, and so we can take a look at them one at a time. So I have it running all the code in the list example, then running all the code in the array example, etc. So let's start with the list example. So in here, I am creating a list, manipulating it, and then printing it out. So let me show you what the output looks like, and then we can break it down. I'm saying the list contains 2 elements, and then I'm using a Foreach loop to print them out, and then I'm using a for loop to print them out. Okay. So let's take a look. What is a list? It is an object that holds elements of one data type. And so the actual type that you use for a list is the list class. Okay, and then in the angle brackets here, you put the data type of what you want your elements to be. So the way you look at this is, okay, this is going to be a list of strings. All right, so just like declaring any other variable, we put the type first, then we give it a name, and so this is just local to this method, so I'm going to give it lowercase name. And then here you should recognize this by now. We're assigning a new object. And so we put, okay, we want to create a list object that holds strings, and we use the constructor method here to create that. So we put the empty parentheses. All right, so that creates an empty string. It contains no elements. Here's how you add some. The list object contains a method called add, and what this does is it just sticks whatever value you throw in the parentheses as an argument. You throw that in, and it puts that at the end of the list. So here I'm adding the word hi. Here I'm adding the word bye, and I'll do another one here to show you. There we go. So you can add values that way. And then down here, I'm showing you, once you have elements in your list, you can change them by, you can access them by index number. So this is saying, in the words list, access the second element. But you might say, wait, that's a 1. How is that the second element? Remember, array indexes, indexes start at 0. Array indexes also, but this is a list. So the first item is 0, second item is 1, etc. It's something that's difficult to get used to if you haven't done this a lot, worked with arrays and other iterable objects. All right, and then down here, I'm accessing one of the properties of the list, which is the count property. So I'm saying use the words list and grab the value out of the count property. And so this property keeps track of how many items are in the list. So earlier I had 2. I'm adding another one here. So if I run this again, it should say 3. 3 elements, and then it's printing all 3. Okay. That's kind of the basics of adding, changing, using a list. Oh, I guess how do you actually use the values? I mean, you could do it the same way as you're changing the values. So if we wanted to just print out one of the elements, okay, we'll put this here, oversight, output one value of the list. We'll call it an element. We'll keep things consistent here. All right, and then we'll get rid of this junk. We'll do words 1. All right, so it should throw in bye-bye somewhere up here. There it is. So if you just want to print out one element, you can do it by index that way. Sometimes maybe you want to go through every item in the list. So let's say I want to just print out all the words. You have a couple options here. One thing I like about C# is this for each loop. And so what this does is it goes through every item one at a time, and it will run the code inside the curly braces here, inside this code block, once for each element. Okay, so how do we set that up? We use the keyword Foreach, just like you would use an if statement or a while loop or whatever. See how it's in blue? That's a C# keyword. All right, and then in parentheses, this is where we put our expression that sets up. Here, we're declaring a variable, a string variable called word. And that's what we'll use to store each element as we go through. And then we say, okay, we want to grab those elements out of this list called words. So we say, for each element, for each string element from the list words, go in, grab the first element, store it in Word, run this code. So here I'm just printing out the value that gets stored in Word. Then it comes back and says, okay, if there's another item, I print that out. And so you can see over here, it's just printing out each item. And the reason I'm showing you this is I mentioned in one of the previous videos, the way we were storing the Zords in the Megazord, we could only have 3 if we set it up that way. And so what if we want to have 50? I don't want to create 50 variables. I could just have a list to keep track of that. And so that's where we're headed. All right. So this is using the for each loop. Really great if you want to go through every item. All right. We also have our old standby, the for loop. All right. It looks a little more complicated, but once you use it enough, you can see the different parts. All right. So a for loop is a loop that you need to specify basically how many times it's going to run. So if you have something that you know how many times you need to run it before you start, it's going to be a for loop. If you don't know how many times it's going to run, you're better off using a while loop. So 3 parts here. We have declaring our starting value and the variable we're going to use to iterate. Traditionally, you start with I because, and I don't know, I always think of it as, okay, we're going to start at index 0. then we put a semicolon. The next one is the condition. So what does this say? This says basically while I is less than what, and then words.count is the number of elements in the list. So while I is less than the number of words in there, run this code. And then here, this is our iterator, or increment. And we're saying, okay, every time it's done, increase I by 1. So this plus plus is the increment operator. So what that does is it says, all right, here's my I variable. Add 1 to it, and that'll become the new value. So every time this runs, it'll add 1. So it'll run through with 0, then it'll run through with 1, 2, 3, etc. until it gets higher than the number of elements in the list, and it'll stop. So down here, I'm accessing the values by index. So when I print it out, I say, okay, in the words list, access index I, which will be starting at 0. Then we add 1 to it, it'll go to 1, then add 1, it'll go to 2. And since we have 3 elements, we don't have an index 3, so, and the count is 3, so 3 is not less than 3, so it'll stop after it prints those 3 words. And that's, you can see that here. It's the same, I'm doing the same thing, I'm just using a for each loop here, I'm using a for loop here. There are cases where you might want to use one or the other, depends on what you're doing, because you don't always have to iterate by 1. The condition doesn't always have to be like this. You could start at a different number, where with the for each loop, you're always going to start at the beginning and go through every item. So you would, if you wanted to look for certain things in the list, you would have to put, logic in here, if statement, to check it, and then do what you want. Where with the for loop, if you know you want certain indexes or to start from a certain number, you can do that, save the computer some time instead of looking at them all. Or, for a range, you can do a range. All right, and then for those of you who like to learn this stuff, I put a little challenge here. See if you can write a for loop that will print only the up to the first 5 items. So, we only have 3 in there right now, so it should print 3, but if you add 10, it should only print 5. With a for loop, if you try to access a value that's outside the index numbers, so it only goes up to 2 in this example. If I set it to 4, it's going to not, let's see. Oh, it didn't run, right. Let's do I plus 4 here. So it's going to run starting at 4. Nope, not there. I'm sorry. We will do, I'll just throw the 4 in here. So it's going to try to access the 5th element in the list. And it says unhandled exception, argument out of range exception, index was out of range. So we only have 0, 1, and 2 as indexes in here because we have 3 values. We tried to access the 5th, and so it crashes because that doesn't exist. So watch out for that. What's nice about lists is you don't have to specify ahead of time how many items they can grow. They're dynamic. So you can keep adding and adding and adding, removing items. We haven't looked at that, but you can look that up, how to remove items from a list. Get used to looking things up. Okay, and then what else do we have? Oh, in the for loop, yes, we got all that. Okay, let's look at the array example now. So one major difference with arrays is you do have to specify the size ahead of time. So we're just going to run the array example here. Let's see what it looks like. All right, so I've got a color here. We'll talk about that. The array contains 2 elements, so we can get the size again. We can go through and print them using a for each loop and a for loop. Got to label this. All right. So let's take a look. Okay, so there's a couple ways you can create an array. If you know the values, maybe you're grabbing a subsection of another array, or copying an array, or taking value from a list, or whatever, you can put in the values here like this. This is kind of shorthand for an array, where the first one is a string of hi, then the next one separated by comma is by, and we can add more following the same pattern. All right. And so what this will do is it's saying, okay, I'm going to create an array. The size is going to be the number of elements here. Store that in words, so then we can access the elements basically the same way you would a list by index. Okay. Notice our type here for an array. So if you're looking at square brackets, you're working with some sort of iterable object or array where you can access the values by index. So here we're declaring a string array called words, putting these 3 values in as the elements. Index 0 will be hi, index 1 by, index 2, yada yada. All right. And so here, what are we doing? We're declaring a different array. I'm showing you here, if you want to declare an empty array, you just use the new keyword here, and then you create, you use this syntax here, string, and then you put in the number of items that you want to be held in there. So now we have a words array with 3 elements, an app with 3 values as elements. In apples, we have 3 empty spots in our array that have no values. All right, changing elements in an array, same as a list, you can access by index, change the value. You can output it the same way. Okay, so you just put in the name of the array, the index you want to print. So this is a reference to the actual element, the value that's stored in the array. Okay, this isn't the array. This isn't a reference to the array. If we wanted that, we would just put apples. But we're accessing one of the values, so we specified the index. There are times when you will do access just the array. Particularly, for example, we're putting out how many elements are in the array. Now this is tricky. So lists, remember, the property is called count. That tells you how many elements are in the list. In arrays, it's called length. All right. So don't get that confused. So this array contains whatever is stored in the length property elements. So we can put the words array contains elements. And the apples array. I like to name my lists and arrays plural. Kind of gives you a little heads up. So here's where I would access the value stored in the length property of the array. And so we can see that now. It should tell us how many are in each one. Words array contains 3 elements, and the apples array contains 3 elements. Okay, I got some weird spaces in there, but it's not killing anyone. All right. For each loop is the same. For loop is the same for that. You just use, remember, the length property for the size for the for loop. You access the indexes the same way. All right, pretty straightforward. Very useful tools for our dry acronym. Remember, don't repeat yourself. So here we are storing values in structures that can hold multiple values of the same type, so we can easily access them and loop through them. So by using these with loops, we can save a lot of space, and we can with a list we can have a dynamic amount. So let's set this up. Let's go back to. I'm going to turn these functions off and turn back on the script. All right. So let's see what we're at here. Okay. So we've got the printing out the Zords here, and that is the mess down here. So here we have these 3 lines repeating the same code, just with different variables. So, we're taking up a lot of, this is actually a lot of horizontal space being taken up. Makes it a little harder to read. We can just make a little function for this, and then put the Zords in a list inside the Megazord class instead of having all the variables stored there. And then we can just loop through it. And if we want to add more than 3 or kick one out, we can do that pretty easily. And it'll manage all of that for us. We don't have to create 1.5 million variables. Easier to work with, takes up less space, easier to read. You guys got to learn this stuff and know when to use it. Okay, so let's fix the Megazord class. So when we no longer want a list of the Zord variables, we actually just want a list of Zord type. We'll call it Zords, and we don't know what we're going to put in it yet, so we just need to declare it as a new list. That way we can put values in there. Because remember, what does this part do? We're creating a variable. We specify the type and the name. Okay, what's stored in there? Nothing. When you create a variable, it's empty. So at this point, there is no list. We have a variable that can store a reference to a list, but there's no list there, so we need to create that using a constructor. So, I mean, it's a lot of repetition here. Don't take it for granted that this is how you create an object, because you need to understand, how to affect these things. This is declaring a variable, and then we're creating and assigning a new object. This is required to be able to manipulate the list outside the class. All right, and we don't need to use a get set because we're not going to be changing the value in the actual property here. We aren't going to change that. We need to access it to be able to add new Zords to the list. Now, for now, because we haven't looked at class methods yet, we're going to do it outside the class, but it's a very improper way to do it. We're just learning the syntax, so just make sure you understand what we're doing. Ask me if you don't know. Okay, so we got our list in there. All right, I'm going to keep these other variables in here for now so it doesn't explode I don't have to change everything, but we'll change the code to use the list. Okay, and then in the Zord class, I don't think we need to change anything. All right. So now we come into our function for doing the script. All right. All right, so we're creating the Megazord. Let's give it a different name here. All right. And then here, we're creating these, or we were accessing these properties to create the new Zords. We no longer want to do that. We're actually just going to create, we'll create the Zord and then add it to the list. So we can do it like this. Okay, we want Zord temp Zord. Okay, so we're going to add a new Zord object, and this is our reference to that. All right. I think we can get rid of this for now. Comment it out, and then let's see if it works. Oh no, I got to fix everything else first. Okay. So we created our first object. Let's set it up. So we're gonna do. We actually just need this code, right? What do they have? What do we want to set into there? We have name, pilot, color. Let's just worry about that. We got the special attack. Let's do that too, because now it's going to be easier to do that. All right. So doop-a-doo. And you know what? Let's simplify this even more. So let's create a our values that we can pull from up here. So that way it's a little bit easier to, we can just do it with a for loop and we know where these are. Okay, so we'll do names. Oh, no, what is it? Pilots. We'll just make this an array. We'll throw those, because we have to get the data from somewhere, so. Okay, what do we have? We have, oh, you know what? No. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this. It's going to grab only the values. Alright, so we'll do doot. No, let's do it this way. Okay. Alright, they're losing their last name here for the sake of time. Alright, so those are our pilot values. We'll make another one, string array for colors. We'll make one for string array. What was it? What's the other one? Drawing a blank here. Oh, that does have a name, duh. Okay, name and special attack. Alright, so we'll go here, doop-a-doo. Come up with some default values. This is the stuff I should have done beforehand. So I'm going to be lazy. Use boring colors. And we'll do this one too. We'll have two blue, or no, yeah. We'll use one fancy one. Okay. Cat. Spider. And orangutan. Special attacks. Let's see, what would a red cat do? We'll put laser scratch. Oops. You can, okay. Doop-a-doo. I won't say that. What else we got? We got a yellow spider. We'll put web beam. Better keep this consistent. It's important to have good attention to detail here in programming. I know some of you guys suffer from spelling issues, whether or not that's, you know, lack of practice or something else. You'll get better at it as you go, so don't be too hard on yourself. All right, what do we got? A cyan orangutan. What does that do? We'll do some kind of a seismic slam. I hear they have very strong arms. Do not mess with orangutans. All right, and then don't. So in this case, the curly braces, we do need semicolons because the curly braces here represent the array. Okay, so we have those now. We can go in and do a for loop here. Okay, and then we'll do we'll do this. For each pilot in pilots. And then don't forget, this is a variable, so you have to specify your type. And this is just a string. All right, so for that, we want to create a new object. And if we're going to do this in a for each loop, we can't declare it multiple times, so we'll have to declare this up here. Because here, you know, if we try to declare, if we put this in a loop and it goes through multiple times, it's going to say, okay, I'm going to create a new variable called temp Zord that stores a Zord. Then when it comes back through it again, it's going to try to do that again and say, you know, that's already taken, so I can't do that. So we'll just create an empty one here, and then we'll add a new one each time the loop runs. And we just fill it with all of the info. All right, so we can do, what do they have? They have a name equals. Actually, you know what? We have to use a for loop here. My bad. Because we're going to be accessing the values from all 4 of the arrays up there. Pilots, colors, names, special attacks. So if we were just going to put in the names, we could use this, but we want to access 4, so we need the index number to use in all of the arrays. Okay, int I equals 0, while I is less than pilots dot. This is an array, so we have to use length. And I plus plus, because we're going to go through each one. All right, okay, so we're going to create that, and then we need names I. So I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. But it's going to loop through. It's going to loop through the list of pilots. So it'll grab the first one. All right. Well, it's going to go through 3 times. It's just going to go through the number of pilots we have. It doesn't matter if we even use any values from there. It's going to go through 3 times because there's 3 items there, and that's how we set it up right here. Okay, so we create the new Zord, and then I'm saying, okay, where's it going to start? It's going to start at index 0. So this says grab the first item out of names, stick it in the Zord's name, grab the first pilot out of the pilots array, stick that in the pilot property, etc., etc. So what do we need? We need color and special attack. Color, special attack, colors, special attacks. All right, so this creates a new Zord, fills in the information. What's left? Well, we should probably put it in a list, because as soon as it starts over, it's going to create a new object which will overwrite the reference from the previous one. So what we're doing with this variable is we're saying, okay, use this to set up the object, and then you can throw that into the list before you create a new one, because we don't need a reference to it anymore, this variable to reference it anymore. It's in the list in the Megazord object. So how do we get it in there? We access the list. So my Megazord dot, what did we call it? We called it Zords dot, oh no, yeah, dot. So this is the Megazord object. This is our list of Zords. A list has, did we make it a list? Yeah, we did. It has the add method, so we can put in what? We want to put in the temp Zord in the first item, or in whatever item we're on. Okay, let's just tack it onto the end of the list. All right, so we changed all of this here. We don't need any of this anymore. And we don't need to keep track of the number of Zords anymore because the list is doing that. All right, going through to make sure we didn't mess anything else up. Zord.number, that's no longer the number of Zords. It would be what? It is the count of the items in the list inside of Megazord, the Megazord object. So my Megazord dot, what's the list? It's called Zords dot count. So remember, up here we used length because pilots is an array. So that'll tell us how many items are in, or elements are in the array, using length property, where when we use the list, we have to use the count property here. So we can replace that. Okay. And I'm mostly changing that so it doesn't explode due to that reference. These references are gone too. So anyway, remember, as you're changing code, you don't want to do what I'm doing right now and just change a ton of stuff without testing it. This is going to cause an error, so I'm just going to comment it out for now. And make sure it compiles. All right, Megazord 6, type of namespace, list could not be found. Okay, so I forgot something important, and if you want to use lists, you have to tell it to use that namespace. So that specific one is, and it tells you right here. So if you try to use something that, it'll try to give you a hint here. List could not be found. Are you missing system.collections.generic using directive? Well, it's right here, but this is the main.cs. It's complaining about the megazord.cs. So I just need to stick that up here so it knows what a list is. Okay. Okay. In main, the name my Megazord does not exist. And that is because, why? Because we're creating it in here. Oh, I capitalized the Z. Boop, boop, line 48. So once you get used to reading these errors, and you should really pay attention and learn what these mean. You know, main CS, line 48, name my Megazord does not exist, so that either means I type something that doesn't exist, or I put something, or beforehand I forgot to declare it or give it a value. So, all right, so everything we've written so far works. Let's finish out the printing here, and we can use this same kind of structure here to print this out. I think I'll use a Foreach loop though, because I don't know how many Zords we're going to have. Let's pretend we don't know how many. Alright. Well, I guess we don't know how many we're going to have. Okay. So we'll do Foreach. Zord. We'll call it, Zord in my Megazord dot Zords So things can get kind of confusing here. Let's break it down. A for each loop, it needs a variable to store the values inside one at a time so we can work with them in the loop. That's what this is. And where's it going to be pulling from? So each Zord that is in this list. So this is saying, okay, in the Megazord object, grab the Zords list. And we're going to take each item stored in Zord, run this code on it, and repeat until we're out of items. Okay, so instead of adding these now, we're going to be printing them out, so I can go ahead and get rid of that. We don't need to create a new object. We already have them stored in the list. Got to figure out what the end key is. I don't need this for now. On my Chromebook, how do I do end? Could be so much faster than having to select this by hand. And we don't need to add this. We're just going to print these out. So we'll do this. We'll say boop. I can do a quick hair by going 3 taps and then go boink. 1, 2, 3. Boink. Oops. I didn't like that, did it? No, the spacing because of the. Alright. Let's find the lazy way to do it here. Okay. We got the name. And that's right. Let's move these. I don't want to let indentation space. We'll do this. Okay, and then I can throw it in there. Like that. Nope. It's got an extra space in there. Okay, I'm trying to make it easier. I gotta get rid of these line returns. Okay. So, it's not easier at all. Just select it. I try to figure out ways so I don't have to take my hands off the keyboard and move to the mouse to save time while typing. It's, writing the code is the most monotonous part. Actually typing it in, so if we can make that easier, it's worth it. Coming up with the solution, though, that's the fun part. Okay, so we got. Okay, we'll put is piloted by. We'll put the color up here. The color name is piloted by pilot. And then, I don't know, we'll just put a thing here that says special attack colon. Not semicolon. Alright. So that should go through. And should we close the string? That should go through each Zord and print out this message, so we can get rid of, I already got rid of it, all those print messages here. Alright, let's see what I forgot. Oh, I forgot some semicolons. Here's one. I think that's it. Do temp Zord on line 43. Oh, wow. Okay. Oversight here. This is what happens when you copy and paste and you're not paying attention. So remember, the Zord that's being pulled out of the list, we're storing in this Zord variable. So I just need to change these. I'm double clicking on temp Zord, pasting over it. Alright. Why did I do /n? And we don't need this space here, but let's put a little line break before it so I can see the more organized. Alright, so you can see how much time and effort is saved. Now the greatest part is if I add more Zords, I don't have to write any more code. It'll print it out. So, you know, I just have to pull the data. So, you know, generally you're not going to be writing in the data. You're going to be creating the tool that can read in the data from a file or user input, and then you can do what you want with it. Here I'm doing it because I don't have a list of this stuff. Jarxis. And then we'll put another color here. I just want to show you can add another one. The way we're doing this, you do have to add one to each thing, or else it'll try to access an index that's out of the range, right? So, blue, I didn't do blue. Okay, I did cyan. What's another animal? Fish. What attack does the fish have? We'll go splash. Alright. Now, see I added the values in. Now we have 4. Keeps track of that here. Just adds it in. So you can see how much easier that is. So if I had a list of 100 of these in a file, I could just read it in as you know, read it in a for loop and create the objects, throw them in the list, and then create a loop that will print them out. In the next unit, we'll take a look at how to put these in as class methods so that they're not just hanging out in a static method in the main, because they can be part of the class. So you can just call them and it'll do that for you. We're breaking things down into classes. The classes, remember, contain our fields, properties, and methods. And make sure, you know, before you move on looking at this, you really need to understand how to use for loops, for each loops, arrays, and lists in and out. So everything on here you need to know like the back of your hand. Everything I did with lists, arrays, for each loops, for loops. And then if you have extra time, you can look up some more on the documentation or look at some examples of cool things you can do with them. With lists, there's I believe there are functions that you can sort the list. There are searching the list and various things like that. So take a look at that. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.